Maybe you opened Netflix a few years ago, looking for something to watch, and ended up finding a cartoon you completely forgot existed. Maybe it was about trains, buses, airplanes, dinosaurs, or even vehicles that went around solving problems. And the strangest part is that some of these shows just disappeared from our memories. You recognize the characters when you see them. You remember the theme song, you remember watching them as a kid, but when someone asks you what the show was called, your mind goes completely blank. So today we're going back to that time and remembering 10 cartoons you may have watched on Netflix and completely forgot about. And we're starting with one that might be especially easy to recognize once you see the characters: Robot Trains. Robot Trains was a series that combined two things that seem almost impossible for a kid to resist: trains and robots. The story took place in a place called Rail World, where different trains lived and worked together. The main character was Kay, a blue train who had the ability to transform into a robot. But Kay wasn't alone. He had friends like Alf, Duck, Selly, and Victor, and each one had their own personality and abilities. Whenever a problem appeared in Rail World, they had to work together to protect their home and help the other residents. And that's where the show started to feel more like an action adventure than just a cartoon about trains. If you watched it as a kid, you probably didn't need to understand every part of the story to enjoy it. All you needed was to see a train transform into a robot and race off to save the day. And if Robot Trains focused on trains, the next show took that idea straight onto the streets. Tayo the Little Bus. Tayo was a small blue bus who was just beginning to learn how life on the road worked in a big city. He was still learning traffic rules, discovering different places around the city, and dealing with situations that seemed simple to everyone else, but felt like huge adventures to him. And Tayo wasn't alone. He had several friends, including Roji, Lani, and Gani, along with many other vehicles who appeared throughout the series. Each character had a different personality. Tayo was curious and sometimes got himself into trouble because he didn't always think before acting. His friends would then help him understand what went wrong and show him different ways of dealing with problems. The episodes mixed small adventures around the city with lessons about traffic safety, friendship, responsibility, and getting along with others. And maybe you don't remember the name Tayo today, but there's a good chance you'd recognize that little blue bus immediately. Now, if you traded buses for airplanes, there was another show that basically turned the entire world into a runway: Super Wings. Jet was a small red airplane with a pretty important job. He delivered packages to children all around the world, but the deliveries were never as simple as they sounded. In every episode, Jet traveled to a different country and discovered that the person receiving the package needed help with some kind of problem. And that's when his Super Wings friends came in. The team was made up of different airplanes, each with their own abilities. Whenever Jet realized he couldn't solve a problem by himself, he called the others for help. That meant every episode could take the characters to a completely different part of the world, showing different cities, cultures, and landscapes along the way. And one of the most memorable things about the show was the idea that any delivery could suddenly turn into a mission. You could start an episode thinking Jet just needed to deliver a package, and a few minutes later he would be caught in a huge adventure. But if you remember vehicles that weren't exactly airplanes or buses, you might remember Robocar POLI. Imagine a city where vehicles can transform into robots, and instead of just driving around, they work together as a rescue team. That was the world of Robocar POLI. The main character was Poli, a blue police car who led the rescue team in Broomstown. Alongside him were Roy, a fire truck, Amber, an ambulance, and Heli, a helicopter who helped the team during their missions. And there was almost always some kind of problem happening in the city. A vehicle might get stuck, someone might get into an accident, or a dangerous situation might require an immediate rescue. That's when the team went into action, using their different abilities to find a safe way to help. The show followed a formula that was probably very familiar if you watched it as a kid. A problem would happen, the characters would receive the call, they would race to the scene, and then everyone would work together until the problem was solved. After a few episodes, you already knew exactly who was going to show up whenever something went wrong. Now let's leave modern vehicles completely behind and travel millions of years into the past. Dinosaur Train. Dinosaur Train was one of those shows that could take a pretty strange idea and somehow make it feel completely normal. The main character was Buddy, a young Tyrannosaurus who was adopted by a family of pteranodons. Even though he was different from the rest of his family, Buddy grew up with them and began exploring the prehistoric world around him. But the biggest difference was right there in the title. A giant train traveled through prehistoric times, taking Buddy, his family, and other characters to different periods and locations. During these trips, they met different species of dinosaurs and learned about their characteristics and the world they lived in. So the show managed to combine a children's adventure with real information about prehistoric animals, and that's what made Dinosaur Train so interesting. A child could watch it simply because they loved dinosaurs and end up learning learning a bunch of things without even realizing it. And if you thought Dinosaur Train was the only show on this list that could make a kid stare at a screen full of trains, there's another one, Titipo Titipo. Titipo was a little red train who was just beginning his journey in the train world, and just like Tayo, he still had a lot to learn. Titipo had to discover how train journeys worked, how to interact with the other trains, and how to properly carry out his responsibilities. Along the way, he met many different characters who also worked on the railway. Each train had its own personality, and many of the stories focused on everyday situations while they went about their jobs. The show had a very calm atmosphere, with simple stories that were easy to follow. There didn't need to be a huge threat or an epic mission for something interesting to happen. Sometimes an entire episode could revolve around a mistake made by one of the characters, or something new they needed to learn, and maybe that's exactly why Titipo disappeared from so many people's memories. You probably don't remember some huge battle or a specific storyline, but the moment you see that little red train, something feels familiar. And speaking of trains, now it's time for a show that probably made train fans even more excited, Chuggington. Chuggington was a railway city where trains were the inhabitants of the world. The story mainly followed three young locomotives, Wilson, Brewster, and Coco. They were still learning how to become proper working trains and were given different jobs while getting to know the city around them. Wilson was more impulsive and loved going on adventures. Brewster was more careful and interested in learning. And Coco was fast, competitive, and extremely confident. Throughout the episodes, the three would get involved in small adventures, missions, and problems while learning about responsibility and teamwork. And one interesting thing about Chuggington is that the trains weren't just machines, they had personalities, they had friendships, they had teachers, and they even had their own daily routines. After a few episodes, Chuggington started to feel less like a show about trains and more like an entire city where everyone just happened to be a locomotive. And if you're already noticing a pattern in this list, wait until you see the next one, Mighty Express. Mighty Express takes place in a world where trains are responsible for making important deliveries. The main group is led by Freight Nate, a brave red cargo train. Each train has a different job, and together they have to transport cargo, packages, and important items to different destinations. But the trips almost never go exactly as planned. Sometimes a package needs to arrive quickly, sometimes the route becomes difficult, and sometimes an unexpected problem appears along the way. That's why the characters have to trust each other to complete their missions. The show also has something that fits this kind of series perfectly. Every episode starts with a relatively simple task and somehow turns that delivery into a full-blown adventure. And maybe you watch several episodes without ever learning all of the characters' names. But there's another show on this list that might have made you imagine what it would be like to work as part of a rescue team. Except in the sky, Top Wing. Top Wing followed a group of young birds who trained at a special academy to become rescue agents. The main characters were Swift, Rod, Penny, and Brody. Each one had a different vehicle and their own unique abilities. Throughout the series, they received calls to help other animals who were dealing with some kind of problem. They had to choose the right equipment, reach the location, and figure out how to solve the situation. And the interesting part was that the characters were still learning. They weren't perfect experts who already knew how to do everything. With every mission, they learned something new and became better prepared for the challenges ahead. So if you grew up watching shows like Super Wings, Tayo, or Robocar POLI, there's a good chance Top Wing also appeared on your screen at some point. But now we've reached the final cartoon on our list, and this one might be the strangest of them all, Dino Trucks. Dino Trucks combine two things that seem completely random, dinosaurs and heavy machinery. The main character was Ty, a massive creature that combined the features of a Tyrannosaurus with a construction truck. Yes, a dinosaur that was also a machine. The world he lived in was filled with creatures like this. Some looked like excavators, others resembled trucks, cranes, and other construction vehicles. Ty eventually met Revit, a small creature that combined the characteristics of a reptile with a mechanical tool. Despite their differences, the two became partners and started facing the dangers of this world together. But they weren't alone. There were other Dino Trucks that were much bigger and more dangerous, and some creatures wanted to control or destroy the weaker ones. So Ty and his friends had to build, repair, and protect their territory while facing different threats. And maybe Dino Trucks is exactly the kind of show you watched years ago and now find yourself thinking, how did I completely forget this existed? Because when you look at this entire list, something becomes pretty clear. Netflix had a whole universe of cartoons about vehicles. There were trains that turned into robots, buses learning how to navigate the city, airplanes traveling around the world, police cars that transformed transformed into rescue robots, dinosaurs riding trains, and even dinosaurs that were construction trucks. Maybe you watched some of these shows during a very specific part of your childhood, that time when you could simply turn on the TV, open Netflix, pick something to watch, and never worry about how many episodes you'd already seen. Today, some of these cartoons might feel completely forgotten, but maybe seeing the name of one of them was enough to bring back a theme song, a character, or even the memory of where you used to watch it. And now I want to know, which of these cartoons did you actually watch? And more importantly, which one had you completely forgotten about until you saw it in this video?